This edition of the Ridley Report is brought to you by
We spend a lot of time as liberty activists talking about the way things are and how it's so bad. Of course, it could be a lot worse, but yes, almost everyone in the country is in agreement that things are not so great. But G.K. Chesterton said, and I think this is an exact quote, "What's wrong with the world is that we do not ask what is right." There are a lot of things that are still superior about the U.S. when you compare it to other countries, and even sometimes when you compare it to the past. Maybe we should be talking more about those and about how to preserve them, at least in New Hampshire. The right of free speech and freedom of the press is generally still pretty respected in the United States. Someone once told me that the First Amendment of the Constitution is the only one that the judges out there still respect. Of course, having been arrested twice in my life, once for running a video camera and once for handing out flyers, I'm not so sure that I even respect the First Amendment. But by and large, as long as you're not making a threat, as long as you're not sort of on the government's turf, you can pretty much say and write what you want. I got arrested because I did it on the government's turf. In a lot of countries, you just get arrested for doing it, period, anywhere. On the Index of Economic Freedom put out by the Heritage Foundation, the U.S. still rates close to the top. Number 9 out of, almost 200 countries. It has slipped over the last few years from, 7th place. Now we're behind. It is behind Canada and New Zealand, both socialist countries. The tax rates here are still generally lower than most of the Western countries. Of course, that's partly because they just print money or borrow it instead of taxing people for it. The U.S. probably has more gun freedom than any other Western country, except maybe Switzerland or Finland. Maybe. It's important to keep that in perspective. You can be a dissident here, out in the open, believing almost any nonviolent thing, and maybe a few violent ones, without necessarily ever getting arrested or harassed. That didn't work too well in China. Official racial discrimination has been pretty much driven underground, with the exception of affirmative action, which is probably a government program just about powerful enough to offset all the unofficial discrimination that goes on against black folks. Up until maybe 2001, heck, maybe up until 2003, you could make at least some defense of American military action. No, average people shouldn't have been forced to pay for it, but the idea of intervening in Bosnia, stopping the genocide there, doing the same thing in Kosovo, World War II, Cold War, the first Gulf War, all of these were expensive successes that did right certain wrongs. Chattel slavery has come to an end, at least official chattel slavery, and women have the vote. Those are two big improvements over the 1800s. The Washington government, as best I know, does not currently torture, officially, American citizens. And whatever unofficial torture is taking place is probably more in the form of latter-day Soviet-style stuff. Making people a little bit cold, making them a little bit bored, or maybe a lot bored. You can't say that for Egypt, you can't say it for Iran. But that all goes back to what we're fighting for. We're fighting to keep America from becoming like those places. Or maybe I should say, more like those places than it already is. In conducting that fight, we need to keep our perspective. Having been a Reaganite in my earlier life, I know how destructive the knee-jerk, blame America first mentality can be, and I know how much opposition it generates. It's important to see the good, acknowledge it, and try to preserve it. No individual loyal to humanity will be able to argue with that.
This edition of the Ridley Report is brought to you by
freemindstv.com. Broadcasting news and opinion for Keene, New Hampshire and the Monadnock region. If you like the Ridley Report, you'll love Free Minds TV. freemindstv.com.